Ubuntu has an unusual update schedule if you are new to Linux and don't know what you're looking for as far as updating systems, because the latest version of Ubuntu isn't always the latest version of Ubuntu, depending on your specific needs. So today we're going to talk about that and make sure that you're on the right version that you want. So let's go ahead and dive on into the Ubuntu versions and updating Ubuntu. Thanks for coming on back to Switched to Linux. Well, today we want to, as we mentioned, we're going to talk about the release schedule of Ubuntu, what it all means, and then we're going to talk about how to move between the different versions of updates, understanding that there is a point where we can't go back, and we're going to go ahead and talk about what that is and when that occurs. We're also going to talk about just your basics of updating and upgrading software and sourcing your software. And we will do just a little bit of terminal commands at the end for those that are new to Linux and want to just gain a little bit of basics, but understand most of what you need to do to manage a modern Linux system, including Ubuntu. All of that can easily be done inside of the GUI or the basic window managers that you're used to and familiar with. So we are going to talk a little bit about the Snap Store. We're going to talk a little bit about sourcing software out of there and just checking in on the update process. So before we dive on in, if you can subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so, hit that like button and leave us a comment down there. Let us know, did you like this video? Do you want to see more like this? And just other ideas. I do read the comments and I respond to as many as I can. Sometimes there's not a lot I can respond with, but I do read them all. With that, let's go ahead and dive on into our discussion. So the first thing we need to look at is our release schedule. So here is the basics of the Ubuntu release lifestyle. Now, what is unusual about Ubuntu that is a little bit different from other distributions is they release a new version every few months, but only every fourth version is what we call LTS, or long-term support. So if you see that term LTS, it means that this version is not going to change significantly. Now, in the midst of that, there are point releases that will do major things like upgrade Linux kernels, update some point software that needs to be upgraded, but everything else on the LTS is going to be relegated to security updates to make sure the system doesn't move a lot. I find that this is a really good balance, but it also has a regular release with absolute latest software, absolute everything. And these 9-month, usually roughly 9-month supported versions, these versions, they tend to be the testing ground for new things. So on that basis, Ubuntu has built a neat release schedule for testing latest software without impacting the more stable servers and things like that in that LTS release. So let's go ahead and talk about what these are. So right now, we can see 2304, and the impetus for creating this video is 2304 has just dropped out of support a couple of days ago. So if you are still using Ubuntu 2304, then you want to make sure that you are upgrading to 23.10. Now, you can always go up to the next version, but you cannot go back a version. So if you were on the LTS at 2204 and then you accidentally rolled your system up to 2304, you cannot go back to the LTS. At least if you can, I don't know how to do that. Maybe theoretically possible, doing a bunch of weird things, but this is a basic overview video, so we're not going to bother ourselves with that. But what you'll see is the 1404, which is a long time ago. This released back in 2014. If you haven't noticed, the release schedule are based on the dates and the months. So this came out in April of 14th, and it is still being supported. Probably it looks like until roughly March-ish or so, maybe April when the next one comes out. All right, 1604 still has support back all the way up into 2026, 1804 up into 2028, 2004 into 2030, and 2204 until what many people say is going to be the end of the world. Okay, whatever. So the latest version, which is Jammy Jellyfish, is 2204. And if you see a lot of the distributions that are based on Ubuntu, they are going to be based on one of these LTS. So a modern released Ubuntu derivative like your Linux Mint 21.3 are all going to be based on the 22.04 LTS support. But in the middle of this, and they release them in April and in October. So in April 2023 came out Lunar Lobster, and these are all named after an adjective and an animal, just in case you didn't pick up on that one as well. This one just fell out of support. The next one, 23.10, was released in October of 2023. It's going to be supported until late 2024 when the next version is going to come out, which is going to be, it is January, so we're going to see 2404, which is going to be the next LTS. So the LTSs are every even year. So 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, and 2404 will be the next LTS. That's going to come out, and then shortly after that, Manic Minotaur is going to die out. Now, you'll have the option to roll this up to the 2404, or you can keep it on 2310 and then roll it up to the next release after that. So with that, each of the interim releases have support for roughly 9 months. The LTS expanded security have roughly 10 years. And so you'll see that the standard LTS has about 5 years, and then they do expanded security. So these ones here, the orange bars, are going to be some changes in the software. These are your point releases. And then once it gets to that point, there's no more new software. They're just maintaining security. So that's what ends up happening. And that way you have a good server. If you build one now, you don't have to change your server software for 10 years. That is why Ubuntu is doing this. And I think that they've actually have a really good release schedule. I like how they do this. But for the rest of the video here, what we want to do is we want to go into the distribution itself. And as we look at the distribution itself, we're going to talk about the GUI tools to select the release schedule. We want to make sure we're on the right release schedules. And as we go ahead and do that, then we're going to talk about the software, how to update it, and all that fun, jazzy stuff. So let's have a look over at my virtual machine. This is currently running 23.10. Now, if I was running 23.04, since it just ended support, I'd show you how to upgrade this, but that is not the case. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk first about the release schedules and how to select the release schedule. So if you pull down your menu here, there is a tool for software and updates. So now note software and updates, and then there's the software updater. We're going to get to the software updater in a bit, and we'll look at the App Center in a bit as well. And the additional drivers is in this tool also. So we're going to go ahead and pull up your software and updates. So this is what tells us where our software is being sourced from. 4 things are going to be selected by default on install. So the canonical free and open source software. So this is the Ubuntu curated software, the community maintained free and open source software. These are things that the community contributes to. You have proprietary drivers for devices. So this is making sure that whatever devices you're using have the proper driver support. And then you have the option for software by copyright or legal issues. So these are things like media codecs that may or may not be legal in every jurisdiction. This one, I believe, is selected if you select to install media codecs on the installer, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Other software is where you can add things. You can add things like your oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was a password prompt. My apologies. You can add things here like deb packages and things like that. So basically your PPA supports for things can go there. Now this is the update page. That is the page that we are interested in. So here is where it's going to check for new versions. So if you're subscribed to all updates, security and recommended, or security updates only. So if you want to just security updates, you don't want any changes to software, you can select this, and by default the system is only going to look for security updates, not updating to basic tools or things like that. Or you can do your all updates, which just pushes every update coming through the Ubuntu channel. You can choose when it checks. You can go the never, daily, every 2 days, weekly, every 2 weeks. You can security updates, you can say download and install automatically. That is the default. I'm not a huge fan of this as a default option, but you have the option to display it immediately, download automatically, or download and install automatically. I'm not a huge fan of that, but we're not going to leave that for a video for another day. And then where are other ones, you display immediately, display weekly, or display every other week, depending what your update schedule looks like. Of course, if you go to never check updates, none of those will happen. And then this is the one that we want to talk about here, because this will actually roll us up to the next versions. So you can always keep the current version you're on without rolling up to the next version if you select, depending on what you're doing. So if you select never, and anytime you make a change, you will have to enter your password. Anytime you make a change, so this will never check for a new version of Ubuntu, but will continue to do security updates and basic software updates for the channel you're on. Like I said, this one is 23.10. If you go into your settings, you can see which version you are on. Under the About, under Settings, you can see we're on Ubuntu 23.10. Okay, so if I were to say I do not want to be on these point releases, I want to go up to the LTS and make sure that nothing ever changes, I select this down to the long-term support versions only. This is going to skip any version that's not long-term support. Now, the next one that comes out will be an LTS, so it's going to show up if you have this selection listed. And then when you push the updates, it will roll up to that next LTS. You can say any new version. This will go on to whatever the next version is. It doesn't matter if it's an LTS or not. Now, this is what the default is. And this is a little bothersome to me because when I was first starting out on Linux and I was on 1604 and I really liked 1604, and this was set and I pushed an update and it pushed me up to 1610. I was like, no! Make sure that if you want to stick to the LTS only, this is something you should do as soon as you can. Go ahead, make that change, just to make sure that it doesn't roll you to one of the point versions if you do not want to be there. So that is how to make sure you're on the right thing. Let's just look at everything else over here. These are just the trusted software keys. You can import key files there. This is any available extra drivers, so anything that's not inside the kernel will appear here. And then if you want to get updates, like if you want to get, testing package updates and things like that, you can select this guy here and that'll give you a little bit of testing. So there's that. Now what we're going to do is I want to look at the Snap Store, because this is where most people are going to be getting their software. This isn't specifically related to your Ubuntu edition, but it's going to give you a little bit of more information, especially since the new software store here is new. We did cover it in previous videos, but I do want to go ahead and look at it. We have the Explore option, which is just curated recommendations. Here's your featured. And then we have productivity. So here's like Only Office, Opera Browser, MailSpring, LibreOffice. Here's your development tools. And then we have some games and things like that. All right, and then down here under Manage, this is where you're going to see any updates you have to your software in here. Now, there is another place to get updates. We'll talk about that one after we get through with the Snap Store here. But here you can see we have an update to Snapd, and there's a couple firmware updaters as well. Now, let's go ahead and talk about how to source software, because the Snap Store by default in Ubuntu, they really try and push snaps, and I'm not a huge fan of that. I've separate videos about explaining why. But if you go in and have a look at this, when you go to install a piece of software, it's going to give you whatever this is, and this looks like it's only giving me, it looks like my Snap versions. It's not really telling me that, which is curious because I usually check out Audacity because they have a Snap version and they have a basic repository version. Although I'm not. Okay, here's filter by Snap package. Here's filter by Debian packages. So I'd have to go in and select that Debian package version in order to sort out which one I want. So you'll see that the default here pushes the Snap, but you can choose this. Now, the difference to understand, the Debian packages, these are what is traditionally how Linux installs packages. They're a lot smaller in size. They tend to have better curated options, but they could have what they used to call dependency hell. This is mostly solved, but it basically means that there's some dependencies that might work better for some versus others. And so that's the reason they developed the snap packages, which the snap packages carry with it all of the things that it needs to run the most ideally, but it comes with the limitation that it is a massive size, 268 megabytes versus the Debian package. They don't even tell us it's going to be like 20 megabytes at most. And so that really is your difference. Again, they're not telling us that kind of stuff. That's the thing. If you are dealing with the internet connections, that's that. So you can basically source whether you want the Debian or the Snap, and I'll leave it to you to decide which one you want to do. Now, the other tool that I meant to mention actually earlier before the Snap Store, this is your software updater. This is the thing that whenever you pull it up, and it will automatically run when you start the system, it's going to search for any latest updates, and you can see here that there are updates. So you can see that there's 178 megabytes worth of security updates, and then it gives us the information about these updates. So here's your technical explanation of what's going on. It's downloading the list of changes. So there you go. So it provides the Linux kernel headers for 6.0 and just basically as an update to that. So you can install now, remind me later, or you can push the settings, which is going to take us back to the previous screen where we can choose when all this stuff happens. So that's the software updater tool, and I'm not going to bother updating on here. The last thing I do want to talk about is, since it is Linux and the terminal is big in Linux, we'll go ahead and talk about how to install and test things on the terminal. Usually you don't have to do this, but in the event you need to or want to learn it, you can see the $sign here this is using a root user. Whereas if we are doing something like a super user, you should see a hashtag. So the root login would be like a hashtag, which we're not going to jump up into that. It might be sudo su might allow us to jump up into that. Let's have a look. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now we're as root, and root is a scary place to be. It's better if you don't use your system. Just keep with a $sign and use the word sudo. This does execute commands as root. It's going to be considered a little bit safer than to be in the root user system. So to do an update. Now the update is not installing software. The update just checks the repositories to see if anything needs updated in the system. So it tells us here that 4 packages can be upgraded. And looking at the upgradable, you'll see that it's asking for the Linux headers and a few other things here. In order to do the upgrade, you're going to do sudo apt upgrade, and then it's going to go through and ask, would you like to do this, which is going to download the 178 megabytes we saw before. Hit yes, and it's going to go ahead and push the software. Again, I'm not going to update the system right now, so I'm going to hit no. You're going to want to hit Y to push the update. And now you'll see that the Y is capitalized. That is the default option. So if I just hit enter, it automatically says yes to that and does the update. But we also want to talk about installing software. So if you want to install something specific, like we looked at Audacity, install Audacity. What this is going to do now is it says, hey, so like I said, 30 megabytes, that's about what it is instead of 268. So we'll go ahead and let it download that. I'm not sure how good my internet connection is here, but you can see that it's downloading. It says it's going to take an extra minute. So that's how easy it is to install something on the terminal. You just do sudo apt install. Removing it is sudo apt remove. And then, of course, you can do a purge with a sudo apt remove -- purge, and that's going to clear all the configuration files off the system as well. So there hopefully is a little bit of information about making sure you're on the right Ubuntu version and making sure that you know how to update the systems. With that, that leaves us where we are today. Hopefully that was helpful for you. If it was, you've not already done so, hit the subscribe button, like the video, and leave us a comment. That'll help move the channel along in the algorithm. And thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux. Thank you for watching this video from Switched to Linux. This channel would not be possible without the backing of the program supporters scrolling on the screen now. You can be a supporter at Patreon at patreon.com/TOMM, or at thinklifemedia.com. I also want to thank the open source community who creates such excellent software that makes producing this show possible. Please remember to support your software communities. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.